Hey guys, this is my friend Cara, and we're doing another movie review. The movie we want to review is the 1994 Italian surrealist horror comedy Dellamorte Dellamore, which translates to English as of Death of Love, I think. Mm-hmm. But it's known in America as The Cemetery Man, but let's be real, I think Dellamorte Dellamore is a much cooler title than The Cemetery Man. Yeah. Cemetery Man is also a much schlockier title.
It covers like half the movie.
Now, the film was directed by Michele Soavi, whose name I know I'm butchering. He also directed The Church and the Sect and Stage Fright. He's a very interesting director if you ever get a chance to check out his body of work. He was also an actor. He's appeared in movies like City of the Living Dead and Demons, and he's worked under directors like Lucio Fulci and Dario Argento. Now, Dellamorte Dellamore is based on a book of the same name by... How the hell do you pronounce the author's name again?
Tiziano Sclavi.
Okay. We will go with that. Now, this author is probably best known for creating the comic book series Dylan Dog.
It's just a funny name.
Yeah, it's apparently a really famous comic book series in Italy. So, the plot of Dellamorte Dellamore is we follow this man named Francesco Dellamorte, who is the caretaker for this cemetery, and for some reason, the people who are buried there end up coming back as zombies, usually 7 days after they died. So, Dellamorte and his assistant Nagi have to keep the zombies at bay, and he has just become bored with his life and his existence there. Like, all of this has become so mundane and monotonous to him. Eventually in the film, he meets this woman, and then something tragic happens to her, but then later on, he ends up meeting two other women who look exactly like this woman, and eventually he's confronted by the Grim Reaper himself, who tells him to stop killing the dead, that they're his people, and Death suggests to him that if he wants the dead to stop coming back to life, he should just start killing them while they're alive. So eventually Dellamorte becomes kind of a serial killer. And honestly, that's the basic plot of the movie. The film is less plot-based, and it's more of a character study on the character of Francesco Dellamorte, played by English actor Rupert Everett. A character who I would almost describe as a cross between Ash from the Evil Dead movies and John Constantine. The movie also stars Anna Falchi as the woman who, if you look the film up on IMDb, she's literally credited as she. And then you have François Hadji-Lazaro. I probably eviscerated that as Nagi, Dellamorte's assistant. So, what did you think of Dellamorte Dellamore, a.k.a. The Cemetery Man?
What a fun ride. Everything was unpredictable. The title really does encapsulate everything. It was so goofy, and it was so intense, and it went so many different directions. It felt like it could be 3 movies. Where I thought it was just a zombie movie, just a romance movie, just a thriller. It combined all of those, and very, very psychological, very goofy. It balanced everything so well in a way that only that era of the 90s and horror would have done. Yeah. Like the practical effects, the acting, the bizarre... Just the bizarre, like, twists of, like, what's real, what's fake. I had no clue what to expect. It's so well done, well paced. It's weird. There's so much abstractness.
Yeah.
Like, something from the beginning makes its way back to the end, and I'm like, no! And it's a really fun ride. This had a lot of fun effects, a lot of, like, the little will-o'-the-wisps, the little blue lights. If you look carefully, there's a string, but you don't care. It was just so practical and like, it felt great. And you can see everything. Heaven forbid your film is dark and black and you can't see anything. Everything's lit up. Everything's crazy. So many different plot threads. Were you able to keep track of them all?
Yeah, basically.
Oh my god. Like, so, how do I stop being repetitive. Just so many things happen.
So Dellamorte Dellamore is one of the most unique horror films I've ever seen. It's funny, but also has a strange beauty to it as well, and it perfectly combines exploitation with Arthouse cinema. It's probably Michele Soavi's best film, if we're being honest. I mean, I love the church and I love the sect, but I feel like a lot of his style, especially his sort of surrealist style, really does come through with this movie. Whereas I feel like with the church and the sect, he almost seemed limited in a way. Like, I don't know if it was because he was working under Dario Argento for both those films, but this really does feel like Michele Soavi Unchained. And in a way, this almost feels like both a send-up and a satire on Italian horror films. And the movie definitely has some of the same sensibilities as stuff like Sam Raimi's Evil Dead movies or Peter Jackson's Dead Alive, but it feels like Evil Dead or Dead Alive if they were directed by David Lynch.
Yeah, what do you think of the principal character in the movie? Like, what do you think of him as a character? I remember when we were watching it, you said he felt like kind of a blank slate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he felt very ordinary, and a lot of characters with the media I grew up with back in the day felt very much like the average Joe. He was just an average Joe, humdrum guy. He was very bored with his job, and that's relatable, right? Because he's wondering what the point is to living, but then he starts to have all these bizarre experiences, and then that makes him, like, definitely a big change from, like, Act 1 in the film to, say, Act 2. In the middle, yeah, he's interesting to follow. He, just like your average guy, just falls in love at first sight, gets a little obsessive. Who don't we know that does that? It's relatable, but he's also ordinary enough to just, you're interested enough to follow him. I wouldn't say he's very unique. I wouldn't say, like, oh, I'm reading this book. Oh, it reminds me of Frank Dellamorte. He serves his purpose. He's a very, he's interesting enough to follow, but he's plain enough where you could almost put yourself in his shoes. And he's very blasé about his job. He's unfazed by the returners, or basically the zombies coming back to life. He's so, like, he just gets rid of them and takes a drink like nothing happened. It's his role. He's just, like, going through the motions, like you said. It's kind of inescapable.
Yeah, that's basically what I think one of the themes of the film is this idea of, you know, like, we've all been in, like, a dead-end job or felt like we're kind of trapped by our life or our work, and I think that's
absolutely
what the movie kind of is about. I think it's about feeling trapped. And I think that's symbolized with the end of the film, which I don't want to give away just yet, but again, I think that's one of the themes I picked up from the film, and something that I think the director of the movie said was he wanted this to almost be like the exact opposite of a typical horror film, where most horror is about the fear of death. This is actually about the fear of life. That Dellamorte is kind of afraid of real life. He's afraid of life in general, and he's more at home among the dead. And in a way, the dead in the movie are more alive than the actual living characters we see in the film. I think that's the point the director was trying to go for with this.
That's an interesting point, because I guess that makes sense why he's so devil-may-care, as you say, about the dead just walking, and he, when it comes to being in love with someone and love at first sight, that throws him for a loop. He's obsessed. It shakes up his boring reality. He wonders what the point of everything is, which is funny. Like, he doesn't go out and find a new line of work. He's just so unfettered by the dead coming to life but he stays in that role, and he might be afraid of living. Now that you bring that up, he just might not want to. He's got an interesting layout, but it's kind of boring to him, and he's afraid almost to try anything new. But when he does, he finds this woman he's in love with. It really does throw his whole world for a loop. Nothing is the same after falling in love with someone, and he sees her everywhere, and it really consumes his thoughts to the point where his mundane reality is just so shaken, it's never the same.
What do you think of that, the fact that you see her again in two other women later on?
Very cool. Just like, nothing is new under the sun, so to see people have always been playing around with that in the 90s to now in 2025, like, we really do see a lot of that in films nowadays. But seeing the same person you've met in other people, is it the same person? Is it a different person? Like, the resemblance is uncanny, but you're not meeting the same person 3 times. You're meeting the same face, but different people, but it felt like a karmic, like this karmic loop, like this thing he can't get out of. He's repeating the loss over and over. It was very wacky to see that in an old film. I was like, wow, I like this thing. I like this theme. It's fun.
I definitely got a sense that maybe those other 2 women don't literally look like the first woman he saw, but he's just seeing the same woman basically in every woman he meets. Like, that's kind of an interpretation I'm kind of getting from it.
Interesting. I can take it at face value. You can take it as, like, he's just seeing her where he chooses to, and I'm seeing it as, like, it's the same face, but a different person, and he's just got emotional whiplash. But yeah, maybe he's looking for her, the girlfriend he lost, in everyone he sees, or almost everyone, and just keeps running into her over and over again. Like, what would that be?
Now, what did you think of Nagi? Because Nagi is a character who... there's something about this character that is very endearing to a point. Then there's a whole subplot where he falls in love with the mayor's daughter. The mayor's daughter gets killed, and then he, like, retrieves the head of the mayor's daughter. And the head, of course, comes to life, and he's, like, fallen in love with it. The issue is the mayor's daughter is only 14 in the movie. So it's like, I want to like this character, I want to like Nagi, but then you have that, and I'm just like...
That's a very good point.
Oh, those wacky Europeans.
He's like Dellamorte, where he falls in love with somebody, but it's so unsocietally okay. It's so ass backwards. And it's, the movie's making fun of that, with the way the girl speaks and the dialogue she says. Like, I'm in no position to argue. Like, growing up, if you were younger and saw that, you'd be like, huh? But I think the movie is also playing around with that very, like, it's tongue-in-cheek. Like, Nagi's a weirdo. He's got a very weirdo, skewed view of love that is just not okay. To the point where it's a younger person, out of his age bracket, and she's dead. Just checking all the boxes of things not to do. So that's where he's funny, and that's where the movie excels in being that dark comedy, that black humor, as they call it. This is so not okay, but we're laughing because it's not okay, which doesn't mean we condone his actions. It's like, Nagi's a freak. Like, he is endearing because he's weird, he's chubby, and he can't speak, and he's probably,
mentally challenged,
yes,
I would say?
Yes, and the movie's kind of playing on that, how awkward he is, how out of place he is. I did find that endearing, because the weird way he eats his food, it's very uncomfortable. But people like that exist, but then this is taken to the whole other horror comedy aspect, where it's, everything you're doing is so messed up. Yeah. So that's where I was laughing, and then I don't even know if the main character keeps Nagi in check. He's not like, hey, don't do that. He's just like,
yeah, like at one point,
Nagi.
Yeah, like at one point, he's like before the mayor's daughter dies, Dellamorte is trying to have a little meeting with the mayor, and like Nagi's there, and Nagi's like pining after the mayor's daughter, and then throws up on her, and then like Nagi runs away crying.
I hated that part so much.
At one point, Dellamorte is saying, she's only a child, but then doesn't really bring it up again.
That was endearing and gross. So he was so nervous he hadn't had interactions with women or pretty girls, no matter what age. Ugh. And then to the point he barfs, and that has never been my humor. I find it like I get a visceral reaction, but then also that's the joke. Yeah. So we're at the point in life where we explain the jokes of movies now, but back then it was kind of like that was implied, like you're teetering on that line between this is funny, this is gross, and there's a whole blend of it. Horror comedy was unmatched in that way. They're balancing both.
This movie gets fucking bonkers with, like, the scene where the mayor's daughter dies. She's, like, with her boyfriend, I guess, on his motorcycle, and they get hit by a fucking bus filled with nuns and Boy Scouts who also die, and then there's like a big-ass funeral for all of them.
It's so wholesome, and then just...
The bus goes rolling down the hill, and you see the fucking horse in that one scene.
That was the best part. The reaction from the horse, they just kept in. That's what felt very Lynchian. Like,
but then, you see the boyfriend character come back to life later on... But burst out of the ground on his motorcycle, so apparently they buried him with his motorcycle.
That was the best part of watching it with you. I didn't realize it until you said that. He comes out of the ground like a bat out of hell on his bike. And I'm... you can't... They don't make it like they used to. Christian!
And then, later on, you have, all the Boy Scouts coming back to life, which that's also a funny-ass scene where, Boy Scouts are, coming into, Dellamorte's little apartment, and he's just, nonchalantly shooting them as they're coming in, and you also have, later on, when Dellamorte becomes a serial killer, he, starts killing people in the hospital towards the end, and I love the scene where he shoots the nun, he's, visiting his friend in the hospital, and the nun's like, smoking is not allowed, and he just shoots the bitch in the head.
It's wild. That scene was one of the more surreal ones. Is anyone aware of this? Anybody paying attention? And then
you have that,
zoom out, and you're just isolated into this one thing. And I'm like, what is happening? It's so great.
And then you have that detective who for whatever reason, even though all the evidence would clearly be pointing to Dellamorte, is completely looking past it. At one point, the detective says, Dellamorte, there's a maniac on the 4th floor. Do you have a gun? Oh, good. You can protect yourself. And the detective, runs away.
It felt like American Psycho.
Yeah, it did, honestly.
Yeah.
And you just have Dellamorte going, it's me!
It was so weird. It was so weird. Just what's happening? Who's aware of what? We'll never know. It was great.
Now, before we continue on, here is my friend John Riccadelli giving his thoughts on Dellamorte Dellamore, a.k.a. Cemetery Man.
Hello, everyone. This is my recording of the Italian 1993 Dellamorte Dellamore, a.k.a. Cemetery Man, directed by Michele Soavi. I still haven't seen his other movies like The Sector Stage Fright. I did see The Church. That's a great movie. He's also one of those filmmakers that's not getting enough attention for how talented he really is. After this movie disappeared from the limelight, was on the down low for a while, for a couple of years. Also, thank Dario Argento for jumpstarting his career. Rupert Everett is an actor I've seen some of his movies here and there. I read because of this movie he was popular in Italy. Some people may or not remember that he was Dr. Claw in the 1990s live-action god-awful Inspector Gadget movie. He's also known for playing the gay best friend of My Best Friend's Wedding with Julia Roberts. His character, what a job. He was killing people after coming back from the dead on the 7th day. He was also the kind of character who was looking for love, but anytime he finds love, he loses the love of his life. Francisco's friend Nagi looks like Uncle Fester. His attraction to the mayor's daughter feels like if Uncle Fester was trying to find true love in his soulmate. Despite killing the dead, he kills the living sometimes. He thinks he dreamt about another one of those. Was it real? Was it all in his head or a dream? When the mayor's daughter dies, it's messed up when he digs her grave, cuts her dead head off, imagines her talking to him, not being offended how he threw up on her. What a messed up romance here. The first woman that he falls in love with was head over heels, has a fetish for death. The woman that he falls in love with, we never know what her name is, especially how this actress plays multiple characters in the movie. The shot of the Grim Reaper was awesome. I wish they used something like that in a Final Destination movie. The zombie special effects in the cemetery atmosphere has that Romero Tom Savini vibe, and the dark humor has a little Sam Raimi's Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness, and Return of the Living Dead. This is the kind of movie, don't try too hard, just take it with a grain of salt, and accept it as it is. I could be wrong reading too deep into this movie, shows how hard it is. When the people that we love the most, when they pass away, it can be hard to let that person go, and hard to imagine life without them. Believe it or not, Martin Scorsese says he likes this movie. Before owning this movie on Blu-ray that I got at Monster Mania last year, this is a movie I was able to watch on YouTube for free back in the early days. That was my recording of Dellamorte Dellamore. Thank you, Christian, for having me on board for this. See y'all next time.
Do you want to talk about the ending?
No.
No? Okay. So
Good night, everybody.
So the movie ends with Dellamorte trying to get the hell away from the town. And him and Nagi, they drive through a tunnel, and then they see that basically there's no more road, like, once they leave the tunnel. Like, the road cuts off, and the whole idea is that the rest of the world doesn't exist. That literally this whole town is basically Dellamorte's entire universe, and it's heavily implied that... It's basically implied that the whole movie was taking place in a snow globe.
Yeah, or your interpretation could just be like it's just a dome, right? There's no escape, but like, how it ended was so resolute. Like, he comes to the end of the road and he can't go anywhere, and then Nagi and him switch dialogue. The last time I saw anything like that caliber was Coraline, where they reach the end of the world and they can't go further because it's a dream world. I had never seen that concept before Coraline, so to see this movie from, like, again, the 90s, do that concept was incredible. It was bizarre. You don't know what's real, what's fake. And then when they do the shot of the snow globe and take it back from the beginning to the end, I jumped. I'm like, they connected it. It was crazy. What did you think about that? You thought it was like a dream, or he could just can't...
I almost don't even have an interpretation of the ending. Like, this is one of those movies where I just kind of let it wash over me. Yes, but, like, the way you could look at it is... It gives the film a real fairy tale kind of feel to it. And it's almost like... What if, like, a character from a storybook realizes that they're a character in a storybook? And that's kind of how the ending almost felt like to me.
Absolutely. It was crushing.
But I know you also had the interpretation that it was almost more like purgatory or hell or something, that they're just stuck in a never-ending loop.
That was it, a purgatory. Just like, that's their destiny, right? He can't escape if he wanted to. He keeps meeting the same cycle in every woman, and he's just like not resolving something, or he's afraid of life, right?
Yeah.
Because this life is endless.
And that ties into like my interpretation of the theme of the film being this idea of feeling stuck, this idea of feeling trapped by your job, and that's I think that could be symbolized with the ending, the fact that he now realizes there's nothing else outside of my role in society.
That self-awareness is crushing. It felt like the ending of Krampus with the snow globe.
Yeah.
Where they're like, they tried to redeem themselves in Krampus, and they thought they were fine, but then they were endlessly in this, like, loop forever, just in the snow globe. I like the metaphor of a snow globe.
Now, I'm not sure if the book had the same ending, but I can see the ending of this movie being somewhat inspired by the ending of the TV show Saint Elsewhere. If you're familiar with how that show ended, there are similarities between the two endings.
Yeah, it's a great metaphor for being like, this is your world. It's a dome. It's just what it is, and you're stuck. And that was... When you said you let the ending wash over you, yeah, it could be a dream, it could be reality, they could have actually met the end of their road.
But another way you could look at it, if you want to take things literally, maybe the rest of the world was destroyed, and maybe, like, this town is, like, the only town left on the whole world. Maybe there was something happened to the rest of the world, and...
Possible.
You could interpret it as maybe this was all secretly a post-apocalyptic movie and we just didn't realize it.
Right, the dead keep coming back to life, who knows?
But then again, you could just interpret it as maybe the film was literally taking place in a snow globe.
What do you do after that self-awareness? It cuts off at the perfect time where it's like, they're trapped, but like, what do they do with that? We'll never know. It was a great film.
Real quick, I just want to show the Blu-ray set from Severin Films, which is absolutely gorgeous. Severin is quickly becoming one of my favorite DVD and Blu-ray companies. The box set comes with this booklet, which contains an essay by Claire Donner, and then you have the inside case, which has the Cemetery Man title. Inside you have the 4K Blu-ray, which I actually don't have a 4K player, but luckily it does have the regular Blu-ray. Here you have a disc with additional extras, and then the final disc is actually a CD with the soundtrack by Manuel de Sica. I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right, but yeah, the score for the movie is absolutely amazing.
And look, streaming certainly has its place, but it's special edition box sets like this that are kind of the reason I love physical media.
What do you think of the score of the movie?
You know, it was so... I love those sounds and everything they tried to do. It wasn't very orchestral. As far as I remember, it was very electronic. I remember commenting to you when we watched it, it felt like partly a Goosebumps episode, or like an episode of The X-Files, or Twin Peaks, because it was like that synthesizer that I loved so much, but it was also like, it worked. And when there was music that I was so caught up in the events of the film that I think the score, I didn't really notice it wasn't jarring. It was like very perfect for what it was. Like it blended with everything.
But yeah, Dellamorte Dellamore, it's an amazing film. I first saw it in high school and haven't seen it since until recently when I got the Blu-ray from Severin. And of course I rewatched it again in preparation for this review, but I definitely think it's one of the great Italian horror films. I think it's right up there with Deep Red, Suspiria, Zombie 2, The Beyond, Demons as one of those essential Italian horror films. And I really can't say there are too many movies like it. It's a zombie movie, it's an offbeat, absurdist comedy, it's a surrealist horror film, it's a psychological character study, and is also this strangely beautiful sort of modern-day fairy tale.
Any closing thoughts on Dellamorte Dellamore or Cemetery Man?
a.k.a. Cemetery Man. It's worth a rewatch. It's worth a group showing. Like, you could talk through this or you could be silent. It's a fun, like, I want to watch it again. I'd recommend it to any movie enthusiast, but also somebody that knows how to ride the line between horror and comedy. My mom would not like this. I like this. This is not clear cut. It's a fun time. It's good filmmaking too. Really cool choices. Really pretty to look at sometimes. Really fun. Good choice. I'm glad we watched it.
The reason I wanted to review it with you is I felt like this would be a movie you would gravitate towards.
He knows me. He knows me well. And it's great.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent movie. It really is. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that was our review of Dellamorte Dellamore, and bye.